Here's what some professionals have to say about it.
The DSM is a sham. It's been described as a house of cards. Why? Because the diagnoses are theoretical. They're not based on scientific measurements.
It's sort of a shaky level built on another shaky level, built on another shaky level.
It is flimsy, and that it is easily collapsible under the scrutiny of critical thinking.
If you just pull one little fragment of the reasoning aside and question it thoroughly, you'll find it doesn't stand up, and then that means that the whole organism collapses because you've got some wrong premises in there somewhere. In fact, they're all over the place.
It is indeed a house of cards because it's predicated on not a solid structure. It is built to create an apparently legitimate edifice, which results in a diagnosis. But any serious inquiry will show it to be illegitimate.
What is it based on?
Well, it started out as a simple desire for psychiatry and psychology to be accepted by mainstream medicine.
We psychologists have always desperately wanted to be accepted as a real science, as a true science. Now, what the early psychologists did was they looked around and they saw what other scientists were doing, and they decided to emulate them.
Modern approaches to classifying psychiatric disorders dates from the 19th century. Nearly all the clinical concepts we have today originate from that time. Probably the most important of all was a chap called Emil Kraepelin, who worked first of all in Heidelberg and then in Munich.
Never heard of him.
Emil Kraepelin is known as the father of psychiatric classification. He was the first person to classify what he thought were biological illnesses in the brain. There was dementia praecox, which is now called schizophrenia, manic depressive illness, and paranoid psychosis. All concepts that still exist in the DSM today.
That's it? 3 disorders?
Yes, only 3. But Kraepelin's system soon became very popular. Listen to this.
Kraepelin's system caught on very quickly, not only in the German-speaking world, but also in the English-speaking world in the United States and Britain. It caught on because up to that point, nobody had an agreed way of talking about patients.
So in the early 1950s, there was compiled Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Now, there are very few statistics in the book. Disorder is used essentially as a euphemism for illness. This is a book which catalogues mental illnesses for which no medical sign has ever been discovered.
This primitive pamphlet was 130 pages long and listed 112 mental disorders, small compared to the current DSM, but much bigger than anything Kraepelin envisioned.
Why so many?
Because by defining more and more of life as abnormal, psychiatrists could get their hands on a huge amount of government money.
Defining life? What do you mean?
Well, things like holding your breath.
Government money. You caught that, y'all? And then all these crazy things.
Biting your nails, thumb sucking, sleepwalking, poor efficiency, even homosexuality.
That's ridiculous. They added all those just to have people to treat?
And more. Then the second version, DSM-2, came along in 1968 and expanded to 178 disorders, again to grab even more government insurance money.
Government insurance money. Do you get this? Do you get this? We've all been Shanghaied. Shanghaied. Do you get that?
To do this internationally, the DSM-2 was specifically written to align with the International Classification of Disease, the ICD, a book extensively used in Europe and around the world that, apart from psychiatric diagnoses, lists real medical diseases.
So that's how psychiatric disorders got accepted by mainstream medicine.
It was a start, but the DSM-2 was still not scientific, as it was heavily influenced not by actual clinical testing, but by the theories of Austrian psychologist Sigmund Freud.
Then there must have been a lot of neuroses in that book, right?
Yep, but there was absolutely absolutely no knowledge of what caused them, nor did they even look for a cause.
Inclusion of the disorder in the classification does not require that there be knowledge about its etiology. So in other words, to make a diagnosis, you really don't need to bother with cause and effect. You don't need to know what causes the condition.
Wait a minute. If the DSM doesn't tell you what causes its mental disorders, how do psychiatrists discover them in the first place?
The answer may surprise you.
New diseases are being invented all the time, and I want to...
New ones all the time. Do you know if they use little kids for that or not? They stick them all in these little, like, sweatshops for growing up, called foster homes. Do you suppose they are coming up with more BS to put in another edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual to add to the already deadly scam? Do you suppose?
Emphasize the word invented, because when it comes to psychiatry...
Invented. Invented means make-believe. We make believe there's something wrong with you.
Psychiatry, mental illnesses are not discovered. They're invented.
They're manufactured and invented, and especially on paper. We're not supposed to manufacture evidence to use against someone. But obviously, that little thing there didn't get taken seriously by everyone. We'll just manufacture something wrong with you, put it on paper, prescribe you hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of medicine every year, so our buddies Big Pharma can pay for us a ski trip in the Alps. That's really effing rude.
The system works in terms of diagnosis is that every few years a group of psychiatrists and psychologists sit around in a room and vote on new diagnoses.
This is science? I can't believe it.
Don't
See, rude.
worry, you're not alone.
The diseases are voted on? What do you mean?
Did you say are they voted into existence?
Are voted?
As in created?
Oh, man.
I think that's kind of ridiculous.
It's crazy that you would vote. I definitely don't agree.
I don't agree with it at all.
Mental disorders should be based on scientific research.
I have been led to believe.
They can't measure something in your head that they made up and made you think you have. What do you think they would be measuring? They would be measuring the people who put it in your head in the friggin' first place.
That it's all based on medicine and science.
So I'm kind of shocked to find that out.
Me too.
It's not based on science.
There's more. Not only are mental disorders voted into the DSM, but now and then they are also voted out. Take, for example, homosexuality, listed in DSMs 1 and 2 as a mental illness. This is how the editor-in-chief of the DSM-3, Robert Spitzer, explained it.
I came up with a definition in 1973 that made it possible to argue that homosexuality was not a mental disorder.
On a vote, essentially, at a conference of the American Psychiatric Association, it was removed.
Now, did they discover that homosexuality was not a disease through scientific processes? No. It was included for political reasons, and it was removed for political reasons.
And the end result is a vote. It's a supposed democracy. So to call it science is a complete fabrication.
So the DSM is actually political, not scientific.
Right.
You said it. You said it right there. Political. Very.
thought psychiatrists wanted to be seen as doctors.
You're right. That's why they had to make their manual look much more scientific.
Which it wasn't. So what did they do then?
Well, they decided the DSM's next edition was going to be completely different. It was a decision that would change psychiatry forever.
If you roll the clock forward to the 1970s in the United States, basically at that time psychiatry was in very poor shape for a number of reasons. First of all, it was held in very low regard by other members of the medical profession. So psychiatry was the sort of thing you did if you couldn't succeed in any other area of medicine.
And people such as Robert Spitzer in America made it very clear that the time had come essentially for psychiatrists, being doctors of medicine, to practice medicine. So if a psychiatrist was spending a lot of time dealing with people who were anxious, depressed, these dilemmas, these problems in living now essentially had to be redefined, and they were redefined as medical conditions.
And their solution to this was to come up with a manual which defined psychiatric disorders more carefully. So
the bottom line is, a lot of people have been shanghaied by psychiatry and psychiatrists who believe in psychiatry, who don't believe in people. They especially don't believe in people that are just born to fight crap like that. I'm so offended. I've watched this video probably 4 times at least. I found it this summer. I was watching it on Bradley's big screen in the basement because he has a really nice big screen. It's like probably 10 times bigger than my laptop. So I am no stranger to this video at all. And I don't get any happier with each passing time I watch it. You know, I don't like it any better this time than I did the last time, or the time before, or whenever, the first time, because it's ignorant. These are stupid things. The people that do this must, I can't even, forget this.
Than before.
Meanwhile, the number of mental disorders in the DSM-3 had ballooned to 259. But to sell the idea that psychiatry was a true medical science, they had to spin it with a really impressive scientific-sounding theory.
But with DSM-3 from 1980 on, there was the progressive medicalisation of psychiatry, and the notion of chemical imbalance was invented and essentially took hold.
Whoa, chemical what?
Chemical imbalance theory. It was first suggested in 1965 to try to explain how depression might be caused by an imbalance of certain brain chemicals.
I'd like to hear this.
Joseph Schildkraut theorized that because psychiatric drugs alter the levels of some of these chemicals, then mental illness must be caused by too much or too little of them.
Isn't that backwards?
It sure is. It's a little like saying that because aspirin stops a headache, that headaches are caused by the deficiency of aspirin.
I see what you mean.
But it was just convincing enough to give psychiatry and the DSM-3 the superficial aura of science. As Robert Spitzer put it,
Psychiatry felt now, gee, we're more scientific, we're part of medicine.
So it worked.
yes, and ever since then, psychiatrists and the pharmaceutical industry have relentlessly promoted this chemical imbalance theory, both to the medical field and the public.
If you are one of the millions of people who live with uncontrollable worry, anxiety, and several of these symptoms for 6 months or more, you could be suffering from generalized anxiety disorder, and a chemical imbalance could be to blame.
Prestige is thought to work by affecting the levels of 2 chemicals in the brain.
I'll tell you what kind of thing I've got wrong with me right now. I've got this Shanghaied by Psychiatry.